Hello, welcome to this section about running compute instances on top of Google Cloud Platform. So more precisely, what we're talking about is a feature called Google's Compute Engine, or GCE, and essentially allows you to run virtual machines on top of Google's infrastructure. So just as a quick sidebar, let me just read off the definition of a virtual machine. A virtual machine is a virtual environment that's essentially a computer that runs inside another computer. Essentially, there's a host computer that's the machine that's underneath this whole, and it provides essentially a partition for another computer to run where it has the hosted computer has its own CPU constraints, right? It has a certain given amount of CPU, a certain amount of memory. You have an operating system and other access to like networking, right? And you sort of have a bubble on top of that computer. And so the host machine can be running many, many different computers, and that's what Google does. They provide a physical machine somewhere that is running these virtual machines. And then with these virtual machines, we can now run software inside of those virtual machines just as well as you were running them on your personal laptop. So that's basically what a virtual machine is, in a roundabout way. So what we're going to do now is go through an exercise of creating a virtual machine using Google Cloud Console. So let's do that first. So here's Google Cloud Console. I'm in my training main project, right? And I can go over here, and there is a tab called, or a menu called Compute Engine. So first of all, one thing you can do is you can pin this, because we're going to use this a lot, which puts it back at the top so I don't have to keep on scrolling down. I'm going to go over to virtual machine instances, and we have none because we haven't done it yet. Now, one sidebar, if you remember in an earlier video, we activated the Google Cloud Compute API. That's why this didn't like sit around here and churn away for a minute. We can go right away and start creating VM instances. So let's create one here, and I'll highlight some of the key aspects of it. So first of all, you have a name, so that's the name of the instance, right? We won't mess around with labels for now, but one thing you should notice here is there's a region and a zone. So thinking about resources, then VMs are zonal resources. They live in an actual, this is running on an actual computer that lives in a particular data center, which is in a particular zone. So it's in US Iowa 1, US Central 1A zone. And there's like 4 different zones here. Okay. Next thing is machine configuration. So essentially, there's lots of different types of kinds of machines that have different performance characteristics. Some have more CPU, some have more memory, even some have some GPUs, graphical processing units, right? But we're going to just leave it as the standard E2 medium. It's got it's a virtual 2 CPUs with 4 gigs of memory, which is pretty decent, especially for a server, right? We're not running like Windows or with Word or something like that on it. We're running servers. We're not going to worry about these settings here for now, right? We're going to focus on next is boot disk. So the boot disk here is the sort of essentially the operating system, and we'll leave it with the default, which is Debian. You can see here you can change to different types of operating systems, right? But we're going to leave it as default for now. And we're not going to worry about identity access management, service accounts, and currently we're not going to worry about firewalls. We're just going to go ahead and hit create. So we essentially, the only thing I think we changed here was essentially that we added the name, and then I just pushed create. Okay, so this takes a second to spin up. In fact, it may take up to a minute. So let me pause the video briefly, and then I'll come back when it's up. Okay, the moment that I actually hit pause, it came up. Okay, so Right, so here we can see an instance, what zone it's in. It has some IP addresses. We'll talk about some of this later, right? Let's just validate that we can do something with this computer. So one of the things we typically do with computers is we log into the console and we just run some commands. So there's a couple ways of doing this. One is, actually there's a menu here, but my menu is, I'm gonna have to shrink the screen. There we go. Here, there's a couple options for basically logging into that machine. One is, let's do the first one, called Open in Browser window. And let's let that connect here. Basically what this is doing is opening up a browser window that basically is a console. Then I can then run commands in it. So let's do that for a second. Let's see how long this takes. It should only take a few seconds. There it goes. Okay, so you can see it says training, Larkin Tucker LLC at instance 1. So clear, ls, I can see files, working directory, I'm in a certain directory. This is basically a Linux machine, and I'm remoted into it, and I can do things with it. So that was, we'll do more stuff later with these instances, but I just want to show you that that's how you can log into it. Another way you can log into this is through something called, let's see what that is. So there's something called, okay, well, I'll get ahead of myself here. Another way of doing it is through a Gcloud command line. And I'm going to copy this, and then what we're going to do is we are going to log into it from our computer. So you can see the command is Gcloud beta compute secure shell. You have to give the zone and a name and the project, and then after you give all that information, I'm basically at where I was here. I'm basically logged into now this computer again, this time with a different username, but I am in the box. Port working directory. Okay, so that's it for that one, right? There is another way of doing this called this run in Cloud Shell. So let me, I got that copied. Let me see what we go down here. Where's Cloud Shell? Oh, Cloud Shell. So what Cloud Shell is, one of the things we did in an earlier video was on our local machine, right? We installed Gcloud on my machine here. It took a while to get all running. And instead of having to do all that, you could actually use something called Cloud Shell, which is basically a development environment, but it's kind of stored inside the cloud. That's the Cloud Shell. And maybe it's easiest to see by example. So right here, activate Cloud Shell. And what that's going to do, will take a second, but it's going to create basically another virtual machine in Google's cloud, right? It won't show up in your list of cloud machines, right? So it's essentially a machine that Google provides you. But this machine is already going to be logged in as you. So if I do Gcloud config list, and you can see I'm logged in as training, right? I'm on the project this. So it's just like on my machine, except for it's in the cloud. So just to make sure you understood this, this is actually not a window. This is part of the browser, right? And I can then type in, I can paste in that command. Whoops. Control C. Where was that command? Oh, I guess I can copy that command from here. View Gcloud command. I can copy this. I can paste it here. And then, yes. Okay, it's still, we'll talk about the secure shell metadata shortly. I don't want to get distracted with that. That's a later video. But so now I'm on the box and working directory. Okay, so that's it. So that's another way of getting on. I think I can get rid of that one. Okay, so that was the Cloud Shell way of connecting to it. There is a last way where you can use your own secure shell client from your machine, but there's a whole procedure around keys, which is literally a whole topic on its own. So we'll cover that later. Okay. Okay, so the next thing is how do we delete this thing, right? Well, the easy way of deleting this one is you just click on it, dump it. Says, do you really want to delete it? Boom. It basically starts destroying it. You see it spinning down right now. Okay, so there's another way. We've been interacting with GCP and in particular GCE, right? Google Cloud Engine or Compute Engine, using the Cloud Console. We can also do all the same operations from the command line. So let's explore how to do that. So we'll scroll down. Okay, so the trick here is you got to build a command, right, where you need to basically create an instance, right? But one of the first things that you'll run into is you have to give it an actual image name, and because it's a command line, you can't just pick from a list, right? So what you can do first, there's a command called Gcloud compute images list. So let's run that from my local machine, and I run that, and that's going to list out the actual images. And you see there's quite a list here. Now, we kind of breezed over in the earlier part of this video, but what are these images, right? So let's go to the list. Images, right? So what images are basically, you should think of them essentially as like installation media, like if you were installing an operating system on your laptop, maybe you've got a set of CDs or DVDs for that matter to then install your operating system, right? So that's essentially the images. And then what you do is you take that, you use that as a starting point, and then you create your own instance, and then you can then add software on top of that. It's just like kind of imagine how you would work with a set of DVDs to install your laptop. So that's what images are. They're stored in projects, not your projects, but in other projects, right? And so what you're doing here with this command, you're listing out images names, right, and what project they live in. And so you can see the one that I think we were using before was this Debian, right, in Debian Cloud project. And so, matter of fact, the command we can use, I think I have it here, to create a new instance is Gcloud compute instances, create. You give it a name, you give it an image, which project that image is coming from, and that's the name right here. And then the last thing you need to provide is a zone, right? Because these are zonal resources. These things don't just live in GCP, they live in a particular zone. So let me just run that command here. Clear, paste, enter. And what this is going to do is going to spin up another instance. And as a matter of fact, if I go back to my cloud here, there's no instances right this second, but I bet if I refresh, I will see an instance spinning up. That's the instance one. Right. I'm running in a smaller window, so like some of these sidebars are kind of getting in the way, but that's fine. Either way. Okay, so we created it, and then of course we can delete it by running this command. Right? Now, what we're going to do here, rather than deleting it right away, I'm going to talk about something else, and then we'll delete it again. One of the things that you'll notice is, oops, let me actually delete this one, actually, now I think about it. Back to here. Select an instance. Okay. Okay, this sidebar is messing with me, but okay, it's fine. Let's delete it first, and then we're going to recreate it, actually, to illustrate this next section. So let me run it from the command line. Again, I have to give it a zone, because otherwise it won't know which compute instances to delete. So this says delete the instance one, named instance one, in that zone. So get that, and it says, do you want to delete it? You say yes, and then I'll go ahead and delete it. Then you'll see that it's deleting. Okay, so let me pause the video for a second, because I want to have this delete fully before I continue. So I'm going to pause. Okay, we're back. Took just about a minute. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is one thing you may have observed is that the machines we created don't have any software pre-installed on it, so they don't do a whole bunch. So they're, in order to do something, you have to like log into them, install software. So we'll do that first, and then we'll explore something called startup scripts, which allow us to automate the process of pre-installing software in VM instances. So let's do it the manual way first, just so we see what the manual process is. So I'm going to create a new instance. And we're going to leave, just like before, we're going to do everything the same. We're just going to check one extra box, though. And under the firewall, we're going to say allow HTTP traffic. Now, we'll talk, there's a whole section on networking and firewalls in particular, but just essentially what this is going to let us do is allow us to access, we're going to install a web server on this box, right? And we're going to be able to browse to it. And by checking this box, just makes it work. We'll explain again later what that actually is doing underneath the hood. So, but the reason why we're doing it is we're going to want to install a web server on there. So we got to wait for this instance to start up. It only takes about a minute, but in the interest of time, I'm going to pause the video again. Okay, back, took about a minute. We need to log into this box, which this thing has popped on the side. How do I get rid of? Okay, I just need to make this smaller for the moment, just so I can get to the menu. Okay, I'm going to open a browser window. And while we're doing that, let's talk about what we're going to do. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to run some commands after we log into the box to install Apache, which is a web server, and we'll validate that it's running, and then we'll explore how to automate that. Okay, so if I remember the commands, the first thing I'm going to do is do sudo -i, makes me super user, apt update. This basically updates the lists of software packages that this box knows about. So did that. Okay, the next thing we need to do is do apt -y. Let me type it first. So what this is doing, the -s means don't prompt me, right? So I'll just do the install automatically without my involvement, and install Apache 2, which is a web server. So that takes a second. It's almost done. Okay, it's done. Now what we can do is, now that we have a web server running on this, oops, actually I just reloaded it. Okay, that's what I intended to do. It just, what I actually did here is I just went to the my browser, and I went to the public IP address right here, and there it is. So right now this is actually my instance running Apache 2, and because I checked the little firewall box, actually I can load the web page. If I didn't check that box, this wouldn't show up. Okay, and now the problem with this is that it was a little bit of a pain. I had to actually, to get this all going, right, I had to actually log into this box, run 2 commands, and then I could then run the web server, right? So ideally, I wouldn't have to do that second step, and that's where the startup scripts come in. So let's see, where's startup scripts? So basically, what we want to do is we want to automate the process of these 2 commands right here, right? So Compute Engine essentially allows you to create what's called startup scripts that perform automated tasks when your instance boots, right? And things like installing software. So what we'll do is we'll just illustrate what that looks like. So let me go back in and delete this instance. Delete. And I'm going to pause the video while this deletes, and then we will create this slightly differently. Stop. Okay, we started back up. Okay, so let's create this one more time, but this time with a startup script. So hit create. I make sure I check that firewall box, right? But then I'm going to do, there's an advanced tab down here, And there's a section called startup script. So I'm going to copy the script out of my notes here. So if you look at these, let's look at this first. So basically this first line basically says this is a bash script, so it's a startup script. That's the same apt update that we ran earlier. This is the same apt install we did. The only thing we did extra here is we can actually create the startup file, right? So instead of seeing Apache, we can actually have a page that just says this is created from a startup script. So I'm going to copy this, go into my automation startup script, paste that, and if I did everything right, I should be able to hit create. I'm going to pause the video again. Okay, we're back. So if this works the way we wanted it to, I should be able to just click on this link and it should load the page, and of course it didn't. Did not. It has Apache installed, but hang on. Let me pause the video and troubleshoot for a second. Give me a second. Okay, back. So what happened here, just so you know, eventually hit reload again, and this time it actually did the right thing. So the first time I got the error was because the startup script hadn't finished running, so it hadn't finished installing Apache. Then I hit reload again, and my browser was caching. This happened to be, I'm guessing it's the same IP address I had a minute ago. So reuse the same IP address, and it basically ran off the cache. Well, it was either that or that last step where it was writing the Apache file. So basically, I just did this too quickly. Once everything was in place, I loaded it, and here's my hello world. This page was created from a startup script, and this is what I was expecting to see in the first place. So that was a little rough, but we just went through the exercise of how to create an instance using a startup script that auto-loads some software. And that's really all we're going to do in this video.